I feel sometimes. Some of y'all didn't know I knew that one, did you? Everybody likes Ferris Bueller. Anyways, 2 Samuel 18. All right, so everything's come to a head at this point between David and his son. That David has gotten out. He's in that city, Mahanaim, and his son is in Jerusalem, and now they're going to have their clash for power. So that's where we're picking up in 2 Samuel 18, verse 1. And David numbered the people that were with him and set captains over thousands and captains over hundreds and captains of hundreds over them. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, and a third part under the hand of Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and a third part under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. Remember, we talked about him. The Gittite would be, Ittai the Gittite is a Philistine, all right? And the king said unto the people, I will surely go forth with you myself also. So David's going to go fight. Remember, there's been a time where David didn't want to go out to war, and that got him in trouble. It would seem as though David learned from that, and now he sees that as the king, it's his place to be on the battlefield. But, verse 3, the people answered, Thou shalt not go forth, for if we flee away, they will not care for us, neither if half us die will they care for us. But now that thou art worth 10,000 of us, therefore now it is better that thou succor us out of the city. Basically, you're not going, David. And the king said unto them, What seemeth you best, I will do. And the king stood by the gate side, and all the people came out by hundreds and by thousands. And the king commanded Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Deal gently for my sake with the young man, even with Absalom. And all the people heard when the king gave all the captains charge concerning Absalom. So the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle was in the wood of Ephraim. Where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. For the battle was there scattered over the face of all the country, and the wood devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. And Absalom met the servants of David, and Absalom rode upon a mule, and the mule went under the thick boughs of a great oak, and his head caught hold of the oak, and he was taken up between the heaven and the earth, and the mule that was under him went away. And a certain man saw it, and told Joab, and said, Behold, I saw Absalom hanged in an oak. And Joab said unto the man that told him, And behold, thou sawest him, and why didst thou not smite him there to the ground? And I would have given thee 10 shekels of silver and a girdle. And the man said unto Joab, Though I should receive 1,000 shekels of silver in my hand, yet would I not put forth mine hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged thee and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Beware that none touch the young man Absalom. Otherwise I should have wrought falsehood against my own life. For there is no matter hid from the king, and thou thyself wouldst have set thyself against me. Then said Joab, I may not tarry thus with thee. And he took 3 darts in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. And 10 young men that bare Joab's armor compassed about and smote Absalom and slew him. And Joab blew the trumpet, and the people returned from pursuing after Israel, for Joab held back the people. And they took Absalom and cast him into a great pit in the wood, and laid a very great heap of stones upon him. And all Israel fled, every one to his tent. Now Absalom in his lifetime had taken and reared up for himself a pillar, which is in the king's dale, or in the king's valley. And he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the pillar after his own name, and it is called unto this day Absalom's place. We'll pause there. All right, so there you go. All this that's been building up, right? I mean, literally for years, this has been going on. Remember, because Absalom went into exile, and he was in exile for like 3 years, and then he got brought back, but then David didn't want to see him, and so then he was like 2 years away from David, and then David, they kind of, reconciled, but it wasn't really a good reconciliation, because it was more like they just kind of swept it under the rug. And then Absalom starts sitting out in the city gate, and he takes advantage, potentially takes advantage of David being ill or sick, when we compared it with some of the Psalms. And Absalom's standing out there, and he's been drawing the people towards him, right? Oh, my dad don't have anybody set up as a judge for your area. Oh, that I were a judge, that I would make the call. And he was flattering the people. All this was happening, and he finally goes out to Hebron, and he busses his supporters in, and then he's got all these other people that have gone throughout the land. And he done told them, when you hear the signal, then you tell everybody that I've been anointed king in Hebron, and all this is happening. And so it has. And now he's made his march. He's gone into Jerusalem. David took his family, the remaining portion of his family. He had his servants. He had Joab, the commander of the army. He had Abishai, who was one of his generals. He's got Ittai, the Gittite. He's got various supporters, his bodyguard. So he's got quite the entourage that's traveling with him. They leave Jerusalem. Absalom's come in. He's claimed Jerusalem. He's claimed the throne. He took David's concubines. He'd left 10 behind to take care of the king's palace, and Absalom took them for himself right there in the sight of God and everybody. All that's happened, right? And now, this stuff that's been building up for years just seems to be done like that. It's just done. David has his captains, and he's got his men, and he's got his soldiers. And he says, y'all going to go fight, but don't harm Absalom. Don't hurt the young man. Be gentle with him. Everybody hears it. They go out, they fight. Turns out that the forest actually claims more people than the sword. Accidents, right? If you're in the workplace, what do they stress to you in safety? What's the number one cause of workplace accidents? Slips, trips, and falls. I heard it. There it was. Slips, trips, and falls. Right? I mean, I know in all the safety training, they would stress to us every year. They'd say that we'd go to it, and they'd say, well, there was a worker at Disney that one time, and they didn't tell the year that it was, I don't remember, that fell off of a step ladder and broke their neck, and they were gone. So it's even step ladders will get you. All this stuff is brought out. Slips, trips, and falls. So here we are in the forest, and guess what? Those kinds of mishaps and missteps and things and mistakes that happen in the forest end up claiming a lot of lives. People die. Kill more than the men killing each other. And Absalom, as he's going through the forest, what happens? His hair gets hung in a tree. Though, remember, he had hair like Ben, except more Ben, if it's possible, man. Sam, you're not far behind. You just keep it trimmed. It's either you wear your hat tighter or you trim it a little shorter, right? These guys are awesome. I wish I could do that. I tried to do this with my hair. It didn't work out. It looked really bad, and Shay will never let me try it again. I promise. You can ask her. But he did. He had those beautiful locks. He'd cut it once a year, and it weighed, if I remember correctly, it's like 5 pounds of hair, right? That cut off. That doesn't count what he left, right? And so, because he didn't Mr. Clean it, and so he's going through the forest and he's riding that mule, and his hair gets caught in a tree. That emblem of beauty, that symbol of everything that he was, how proud he was of himself, how he peacocked, right? He would peacock through the city, remember? He had people that ran ahead of him. He had chariots, he had horses, and they'd announce, Absalom is here, right? They would do all that. He had all the notoriety. He had all that stuff going, and part of that beauty, because he was just such a beautiful man, it's stressed in his hair. Yeah, there you go. Remember, the Fabio. So, well, handsome, beautiful. They both look good. Yeah. But here he is, going through the woods, and his hair gets hung in the tree branch. And his donkey just keeps riding away. And he's just stuck. Right? Now, it's amazing to me. Don't get me wrong. God uses the most simple things to confound individuals. In the middle of all that, there's a soldier that sees him hung up in the tree, and he can't get out. For whatever reason, this guy who thinks he's so wise, this guy that thinks he can rule the country, this guy that thinks that he's on top of his game, don't think to cut his own hair in that moment to save his life. I mean, if it had been me, I like to think that I'd take out a pocket knife and start trimming away. But here's the thing. Absalom had tried to take what didn't belong to him. He placed himself against God's anointed. That doesn't work out. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how closely aligned or related you are to that person. Even if you're his son. When you put yourself against God's anointed, it's not going to go well. Because you're putting yourself against God's plan. That's not somebody you want to mess with. That's not somebody you want to get in the way of. But Absalom did. And God was going to, is allowing Absalom into this situation. He's going to allow all this to happen, and he's going to bring judgment on Absalom by his own death. And so this soldier sees him, and he's got time to go and get Joab. Now, it could be that they weren't that far away. It doesn't necessarily mean that there were miles to be traveled. But he goes and he gets Joab, and he says, I seen Absalom. And Joab said, what are you doing? You seen Absalom? You just come to tell me you seen him? Why didn't you kill him? I'd have paid you. I'd have give you 10 shekels of silver and a coat. I'd have give you a raiment. I'd give you some clothing, right, in order if you just killed him. Which Wiersbe points out that it may indicate that Joab had kind of spread word that if somebody kills Absalom, there might be something in for it. This soldier knows Joab. Joab's not really known for his integrity, right? He's not really known for his godliness. He's the guy that kills people whenever he feels like he should kill them. He says, I heard what David said to you guys. In fact, we all heard what David said. And the reality is, you couldn't give me 1,000 pieces of silver to kill Absalom and put my hand against him, because that wouldn't have been held back from the king. He would have found it out. And I know if he found out that I killed him, you were not going to have my back. You would have kept your mouth shut. Even if you had paid me the silver, you weren't going to support me in that. Joab says, I ain't got time to deal with you. And so he takes these 3 spears, and he goes and jabs them in the heart of Absalom. Now his armor bearers, which he has 10 armor bearers, they join in. And you have this slaughter of Absalom as he's dangling from the tree. They get him out, they find a pit, and they pitch him in it. And they cover it over with stone. That's not really an honorable burial, right? It's really something that has happened in Hebrew history to people of dishonor. You can go back to Joshua and what they did with Achan. They cover a great pile of stone over him. All that happens to Absalom. And there's nobody coming after him. Now, if you remember, whenever we looked at Absalom previously, he had children, but it would appear that his children had not survived up to this point. That for whatever reason that's not described in Scripture, they are out of the picture. They have probably passed away due to whatever the situation may be, because he has taken the time to erect for himself like a memorial, if you will, that we read about, that in verse 18, you have Absalom's place. And so that's what it was called as. All of that stuff is just done. You can roll to the next slide. So, what is it that sticks out? One thing that I would like to know, I didn't put it on the slide, but one thing I do want to know is, what is it that stuck out to you so far about this whole Absalom episode? And it can be from previous chapters. It doesn't have to be from this one. Nothing? So David's grace towards Absalom, even after everything that Absalom had done. Yeah. I like that. Because something we've talked about with David is that David has been very slack in dealing with his own family. Right? He's always gentle towards his kin. Whether Joab, remember Joab and Abishai, they're his nephews. And he didn't deal with them. He didn't deal with Amnon whenever he did his whole fiasco by taking Tamar, his half-sister. He hasn't dealt with Absalom well in this whole time. And I'm glad you brought that up, because as I was reading that, we've talked about that. And there's a lot that be learned about it, about how we need to address issues, especially whenever it comes up in our own home, that, hey, man, this isn't right, and trying to take the time to invest and to train up our sons and our daughters in the ways that they ought to go and the things that they ought to do, and realistically teaching them there are consequences for their actions. But there is kind of another side of that coin, and this is something that, if I remember right, it was Wiersbe that pointed out, is David is slack with dealing them all, but that slowness of wrath, that slowness to be angry towards them with that type of judgment, if you will, that's something that we all kind of desire in our lives, isn't it? When we're the ones that have done wrong, we want people to be understanding, non-judgmental. We want other people to be forgiving, to be lenient, if you will, at times. And ultimately, we desire that from God. So, yeah. Yeah. A lot goes into man's folly, right? Pride costs a lot. David has already seen this firsthand with Bathsheba. In order to get Uriah the Hittite killed, other men died too. We don't know, we're not told exactly how many, but it would indicate that there was at least a decent number that would have angered David. That's why Uriah the Hittite is dead also, was given as that comforting message, right? So yeah, it's a good point too, that, hey, if you're going to be proud and you're not going to, and you're going to pursue these type of actions, it can come at a high cost. Yeah, no, I agree that it's something we kind of hit on with Amnon is Absalom had already seen his dad's weakness, so to speak, and it's likely he wanted to exploit it. In the middle of all this, we do see something else happening with regard to Joab. So, again, Joab is doing what he wants to do. Joab goes out on his own. He goes rogue. Now, he is a guy, ultimately, that does care for his king. Don't misunderstand me about Joab. He does care for David, and he does want to protect David as far as being the king and maintaining his reputation, so to speak. He knows the dirt on David. And there's been times where, he's called for David so that David received the honor instead of Joab. And yet again, we see him going and shedding blood on his own whenever he'd already been told not to. So here he goes out and he he makes sure that Absalom is killed. His armor bearers join in that fight. And as one of the commentators pointed out, it seems interesting that Joab accepted the counsel of Ahithophel. Remember, Ahithophel had told Absalom, let me have soldiers, let me go out and get David, we'll get him tonight, it'll be done, I'll bring everybody back to you, and this whole problem can be over with. But Ahithophel's counseling, the counsel he had give was defeated, right? You had Hushai who come along and countered that on purpose and preserved David and kept him safe. But those messengers came to David and told what Ahithophel had counseled. Undoubtedly, Joab heard it. And he decided to take it. If you cut off the head of the cause, then it's going to end the war. And that has to have been his intent, I would think. Because after Absalom's dead, he sounds the trumpet and calls for his forces to come back. Battle's over, guys. We're done. Absalom's gone. There's no more reason to fight. So that's what has occurred here in this day. I do find it fascinating that something as simple as tree branches has confounded an individual such as Absalom. But God can use whatever he determines necessary in order to confound individuals who withstand him. Now, are there any other questions or comments on that section before we move forward? I don't know that. I thought it struck me as strange, but that was one commentator. I can't remember if it was Wiersbe or if it was Neely. One of those two pointed out that was kind of the right of the king, so to speak, and is carried out later on. I mean, I think if I remember right, we see Solomon do it. We see Christ do it. We see that's kind of that kingly. I don't know. I thought it was weird too. Why aren't you on a horse? But so, and that could be it, especially in the forest. But yeah, I'm with you. It seems weird to me. You know, I would want something a little bit quicker, but they did what they did. All right, we'll pick up in verse 19. Then said Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok. Now remember, this is one of the young men that was a messenger to David when David fled Jerusalem, okay? It said to the son of Zadok, "Let me now run and bear the king tidings, how that the Lord hath avenged him of his enemies." So let me tell him the good news. Tidings can just mean news, but generally the way that this Hebrew word is used, it points towards good news. And Joab, verse 20, said unto him, "Thou shalt not bear tidings this day, but thou shalt bear tidings another day. But this day thou shalt not bear tidings, because the king's son is dead." Then said Joab to Cushai, or this is a Cushite, "Go tell the king what thou hast seen." And Cushai bowed himself unto Joab and ran. Then said Ahimaaz the son of Zadok yet again to Joab, "But howsoever, let me, I pray thee, also run after Cushai." And Joab said, "Wherefore wilt thou run, my son, seeing that thou hast no tidings ready?" "But howsoever," said he, "let me run." And he said unto him, "Run." And then Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and overran the Cushai. And David sat between the two gates, and the watchman went up the roof over the gate of the wall, under the wall, and lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man running alone. And the watchman cried and told the king. And the king said, "If he be alone, there is tidings in his mouth." And he came apace and drew near. And the watchman saw another man running. And the watchman called unto the porter and said, "Behold, another man running alone." And the king said, "He also bringeth tidings." And the watchman said, "Methinketh the running of the foremost," or the first guy, "is like the running of Ahimaaz the son of Zadok." And the king said, "He is a good man, and cometh with good tidings." And Ahimaaz called and said unto the king, "All is well." And he fell down to the earth upon his face before the king, and said, "Blessed be the Lord thy God, which hath delivered up the men that lifted up their hand against my lord the king." And the king said, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the king's servant, and me thy servant, I saw a great tumult, but I knew not what it was." And the king said unto him, "Turn aside, and stand here." And he turned aside and stood still. And behold, Cushai came, and Cushai said, "Tidings, my lord the king, for the Lord hath avenged thee this day of all them that rose up against thee." And the king said unto Cushai, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And Cushai answered, "The enemies of my lord the king, and all that rise against thee to do thee hurt, be as that young man is." And the king was much moved, though that means he was trembling, he was shaking, and went up to the chamber over the gate and wept. And as he went, thus he said, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, would God I had died for thee. O Absalom, my son, my son." fascinating look. So we have that situation where this young man who served as a messenger, he liked that role. For whatever reason, he seems to enjoy this role of messenger to the king. I don't know if he associated some type of prominence. Maybe he felt like it was his place. I don't know. Because in this situation, after Absalom's been killed, Joab says it's time to tell the king what's going on. And so Ahimaaz wants to do it. He's like, let me go. And Joab says, not you. No, it's not a good idea. You're not going to go tell the king. You don't have anything to say to him. The king's son is dead. Let me ask, when somebody has previously thought that they had good news about somebody dying and they took it to David, how has David responded? He's killed him. You know the saying, don't shoot the messenger. David shot him, right? They'd show up and they'd be all proud and happy. I got good news for you. I killed Saul. He wanted me to, and I just put him out of his misery. And this is what happened. This is what I did. And he's like, you think that's really good news? You stuck your hand out against Saul? You're dead. Then Ishbosheth, right? The sons of Amnon. Remember we had that little ditty? The sons of Amnon, despising Saul's son, felt obliged to his resting head, which rudely they took and sadly mistook what David would truly demand. And oh, do we learn how the tables were turned upon the sons of Amnon, right? They killed him. Ishbosheth was asleep, and they went into his room, and they killed him, and they came to David and said, it's over. We killed Ishbosheth. And David says, you boys aren't the brightest bulb in the box. And he has them executed. It's like, that wasn't for you to do. Joab knows this about David, all right? And so he sends a Cushite. He sends a foreigner instead of one of the high priest's sons. It'd be better, let's weigh it out. If you're Joab and you got to weigh this out, who's better to send as a messenger? The guy who's in line for priesthood or the foreigner? He's like, you, go tell David. He says, sir, yes, sir. He makes a run. But Ahimaaz just will not quit. He's just, yep. Let me do it. Let me go. I want to tell him. You have nothing to say to David. Be quiet. Let it go. Drop it. You've been there with people, right? If you've got kids, you've definitely been there. And they just go, let me. And you know it's a bad idea. You're like, whatever, do it. Here's an example. Abram loves food. It's his love language, okay? And you know what he really likes doing? He really likes dipping stuff in sauce. Sauce? The kid I've seen him take a nugget ranch, you know what I'm talking about, from McDonald's, and just dig into it and lick the thing clean. It's gross. I love him, but he just gives it. We're sitting at the table the other night. You know what I like? Hot sauce. Tapatios. Right? I don't even know how you say it, but that's what I like. Had the cap off. He takes, I don't know if it was his finger or if it was a French fry, and I said, he was started. I said, no, don't mess with it. No, don't get it. He just kept going for it, and he goes, and I said, okay. He swipes him a little bit off the top. He didn't dump it or anything. Just swiped a little bit off the top of it. Stuck it to his mouth. He went, and Mama says, what did Daddy do? I'm like, Daddy let him learn. He ain't going to mess with Tapatio no more. If I tell him hot, he goes, hot. And him asks, let me go. He says, fine, go. Run. And he does. And he's known as a runner. They know that he's a runner. How do we know that? Because the guy who's on the door of the tower and he's looking out, right? He says, hey, I see a couple guys. I see this guy running. And oh, wait, I see another guy coming. He's like, you know what? That first guy running, that's like the running of a Ahimaaz. I know that guy. I believe it's him. David says, oh, well, he's probably got good news. He's a good man. He's got good news. Ahimaaz wasn't prepared for the message he was really carrying. He wasn't ready to share the news. I do think that he knew that Absalom was dead. But he wasn't ready to tell David that Absalom was dead. And so he kind of sulked. When he showed up all boastful, everything's good, all is well. And he says, okay, what about Absalom? He goes, when Joab sent me, and I saw some commotion, but I don't really know what it was all about. And David said, just get out of the way. And here comes this foreigner, this outsider, and he says, you won the battle. He says, okay. How's Absalom? Is he safe? May all the enemies of the king be like that young man is. David knew, my son is dead. You got to really be careful if you desire to be the messenger. And you really got to be ready to deal with it if you're going to step up into that role. Even if it's modern times. Because sometimes you're going to have to bear some news that ain't easy to bear. And you're going to have to look at people in the eye after you bear it. And they don't always like to hear what you had to say. And you knew it. And you can feel it. The Cushite was ready. He handled it. And David did not respond as he did in previous times. He did not kill a messenger. But instead, he wept over the loss of his son. He was physically shaken to his core because Absalom was dead. And he cried out that Absalom was gone. And even to the point, as he's lamenting his son, that he wished that he would have taken his place. Oh, that he could have died instead of Absalom. So this goes back to that grace. That goes back to that love. That goes back to that father desiring the best for his son. I don't want him to be in this. I didn't want this outcome. This is not what I desired. It's not an easy place to be. You can roll to the next slide. We already covered all those things. David's cared for his own. He's always taken care of them. And so that's still his place. You can roll to that last slide, or to the next slide, sorry. So, in closing, I would, out of this chapter, just want to note that our points of pride often lead to our own demise. It can lead to our downfall. It's not always good to be the messenger. Keep that in mind. As you're wanting to be the one who brings the news to people, and you think that you can do it, make sure that you can do it in a tactful way. And then also, let us be as watchful after the victory as we are before the battle. That comes from a man named Andrew Bonar. He was a Scottish or Irish minister, I believe, in the 1800s, who said that. And the reason he says that is because David has won the battle. He's won the war. And he's the king. But instead of stepping into that victory, he's treating it like a great defeat. Now, Joab is going to rebuke him for this in chapter 19. Because he's going to say, all these men risked their lives for you. They went to battle for you. They would have died for you. And you're doing this. I know that that's your son, but the reality is you're the king. You've got to carry yourself, and you've got to lead this nation. So we'll get into that a little bit more next week, Lord willing. Are there any questions or comments?
Were they about the same age, like David and Joab, or Joab was older? The way he's talking to him in chapter 19 is kind of...
Well, he would be, I really don't know. I don't know how old Joab was, but David being the youngest of the sons, but Zeruiah being the daughter, I don't know when she was born in that, out of all the children of Jesse. So I don't really know, can't really tell you for certain the age difference, so to speak, between Joab and David. I just know David's the youngest of Jesse's sons, and he is Joab's uncle. But my mama was an aunt to, yeah, right, exactly. so that can work out a lot of different ways. But I really don't know how much older, or if they were relatively close. Any other questions? All right. Well, ultimately, remember this. In all the ups and downs and ins and outs and everything that we see as we study the King David and kingship, we're always finding we're seeing the flaws, and we're armchair quarterbacking these guys, basically. And we're always left wanting. And this is something we mention often, but it's always worth remembering. As much as we feel like these guys are just so close, right, David? You're just so close, but then this happens or that. Ultimately, there is the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords who will get it all right, who has gotten it all right thus far, and who will do it all right when his kingdom is established, and that's Christ. When he establishes that millennial kingdom here on earth, it's going to be the perfect kingdom on earth. He's going to administer justice. He is going to reign in righteousness. So as we study these things and we're like, man, that's rough. Man, that's hard. We serve the greatest king of all. And so all the shortcomings that we find prepare us for the one who won't ever fail us. Keep that in mind as well.
That's what he told him about his son, too. He said, Tidings to the Lord, a king, for the Lord has avenged this day all them who against David. He's talking about God. Vengeful.
Yeah, they viewed Absalom as a traitor. I mean, ultimately, Absalom committed treason. He staged a coup, and he ousted the rightful king. And so, everybody else is looking at Absalom from the outside of, this guy's no good. David's seeing the little boy that he, that played at his feet, and that he maybe sang to, or played the instruments for, because David, poet, musician, there's no telling what all he had done with Absalom over the years. So it's definitely a difficult task. But yeah, God had granted the justice that was necessary, and they saw it that way, but David didn't want to. All right.
Sometimes when I'm studying that, I look at life. Before you know it, you live it over and over and over, but you look back. It used to be this way, that way. Remember people. Ones that were a blessing, ones that were always in trouble. Reminiscing. God always comes through, like you said.
Yeah.
If you let him. Always.
Yep. He's always faithful. All right. How about we go to the Lord in prayer and we'll be dismissed. Heavenly Father, we come to you once again, and Lord, we're so thankful that even in all the things that we see and all the difficulties that we find in our own lives or in the lives of those that we read about in Scripture and study, Lord, we're comforted by the reality that Jesus is King and that Christ is perfect, and that